Greetings everyone. Welcome to the special lecture, Making of Indian Republic. This lecture is being delivered to celebrate India's Republic Day. A constitution symbolizes independence of a country. Framework and structure for the governance of a free country are provided in the Constitution. The Constituent Assembly prepared the draft of the Constitution by keeping the Objectives Resolution as the backdrop, which reflected the aspirations of people of India. The framing of the Constitution was completed on November 26, 1949, when the Constituent Assembly formally adopted the new Constitution. The Constitution came into force with effect from January 26, 1950. Indian Constituent Assembly, which was formed as a result of several discussions between the Indian leaders as well as members of the British Cabinet Mission, had its first meeting on December 9, 1946. The purpose of the assembly was to present India with a constitution which would serve as a lasting principle, and hence selected a number of committees to methodically explore an assortment of aspects of the projected constitution. The recommendations were then debated, discussed and revised several times before the Indian Constitution was confirmed and officially adopted 3 years later on 26 November 1949. The Constitution begins with a preamble which declares India to be a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. The preamble also mentions the goals of securing justice, liberty and equality for all its citizens, because these were the very ideals on which our freedom fighters also were fighting against the colonial regime. It also meant a promotion of national unity and integrity on the basis of fraternity among the people, assuring dignity of each and every individual. The concepts of the nation and the state both grew as parallels in Indian history. Nation indicated a collectivity of people who have a certain bond amongst themselves, while the state indicated a structured authority to rule over people in a certain territory. So if we talk about Indian political thought, it has its own distinguishing features. It is closely linked to religion, social structure, ethics, so much so that it becomes very difficult to distinguish the political from other spheres of thought. There were several Brahmanical as well as non-Brahmanical traditions which contributed to the evolution of political thought in India. Buddhists, Jains and later Muslims also came out with their own notions of good governance, duties as well as obligations. It is true that early Indian thinkers did not develop political philosophy as an autonomous discipline. And the kind of systematic tradition of political philosophy required a critical examination of Indian social structure, and also if we compare with the social structure of classical Athens, where the tradition of political philosophy made its first appearance, many differences appear. So as you can see in this visual that is being shared with you on the screen, a constitution definitely indicates both the government as well as the people. It incorporates important information regarding legislative, judicial as well as executive powers. Technically speaking, a constitution can be described as a set of fundamental principles or established precedents according to which a state or other organization is governed. So therefore, when the principles are written down into a single collection or a set of legal documents, those documents may be said to constitute a written constitution. However, a very important statement that was made by Patrick Henry as early as 1730, he was there from 1736 to 1799. So, as early as 18th century, the idea was that the constitution is not an instrument for the government to restrain the people. It is an instrument rather for the people to restrain the government. So, therefore, the very idea of having a constitution was to have better and accountable governance. If we talk about the evolution of constitutional principles, then one can say that Ashokan edicts definitely established some kind of a constitutional principle. And for the third century BCE, Mauryan kings' rule in ancient India reflected certain principles that were definitely going to indicate the ways and the means of administrative principles. The edicts of Ashoka are a collection of almost 33 inscriptions which are found on the pillars as well as on stones, boulders, cave walls, and these were made by the Emperor Ashoka, who belonged to the Mauryan dynasty. These are some of the samples, as you can see, and the way they were inscribed, so that these messages could be read by the passers-by, by the merchants, by anyone who was passing by the areas where these were installed. So they were very important documentation. Then later on, with the onset of colonial rule and with the coming in of English East India Company, while in 1600 the company had come to India as a trading company from Britain, but by 1765 East India Company had become an administrative power, especially after gaining the right of taxation in Bengal after defeating Nawab of Bengal Siraj-ud-Daulah during Battle of Plassey. So henceforth we see that colonialism began to have an impact on Indian political scene as well. So during the rule of East India Company from 1765 to 1858, it was during this period that the company tried to establish a control over most part of India and that too from a single center in Calcutta. Different acts and laws were enforced by company during this specific time span so that company could retain its power and authority. However, the company came under control of Parliament of Britain and its rule ended with the revolt of 1857. The company's rule was definitely marked by famines, by epidemics and by misrule, misgovernment, and as a result, Indians suffered a lot. Then we can talk about British Raj from 1858 to 1947. This period of the British Raj was that time span when the Constitution of India also took shape and it passed through several stages. So the most important stage was in 1858 when an act was introduced for better governance of India. With this act directly put India under the control of the British government instead of English East India Company. So an office of the Secretary of State was established and this was given the charge of Indian government. In India, the Governor General working under the Secretary of State was to lead the administration. The next important step was the Indian Councils Act 1861. where a separate legislative council was set up to assist the Governor General in the process of making of laws. Now, this also indicated that some Indians could be appointed to the council, but that was depending on the discretion of the Governor General. Then Indian Councils Act of 1892 was a result of rising demands that were raised by Indians from time to time. So the sizes of executive and legislative councils were increased, and now more Indians were appointed to these councils, and also some kind of principle of election was introduced. So all these changes were a result of the changes that were also going on in the political sphere. With the formation of Indian National Congress 1885, and with education making an impact on Indians who were now raising a voice against the British imperial policies, these changes were bound to happen. The next major development came in 1909 in the form of Indian Councils Act, which again increased the size of the council, and it also gave the legislative council the power to discuss certain matters and also to ask questions. Then in 1919 was the Government of India Act, which introduced the principle of diarchy, that is partial responsible government at the provincial level. So elected Indians were given some charge of some areas of governance like industry, education, etc. at the provincial level. Next major change that came about was in the form of Government of India Act 1935, which introduced provincial autonomy, responsible government at the provinces with elected Indians in charge of the administration, as well as the principle of elected legislatures. A federal government was proposed, though it did not come into effect. At the center, diarchy was introduced. And then came Indian Independence Act 1947, by which the British gave up control of the government of India to two dominions, India and Pakistan, for the time being, till the constitution was made. Both of them were to be governed as per Government of India Act 1935. So independence came with partition, and after that so many other changes happened. And for the time being, till the constitution was made, India was to be governed in accordance with the Government of India Act 1935. The assembly met in sessions that were open to the public for 166 days, spread over a period of 2 years, 11 months and 17 days before finally adopting the constitution. It was finally passed and accepted on November 26, 1949. In all, the 284 members of the assembly signed the official copies of the Indian Constitution. After many deliberations and some modifications, over 111 plenary sessions in 114 days, the 308 members of the assembly signed 2 copies, final of the document, one each in Hindi and English, on 24th January 1950. Same day, the Assembly unanimously elected Dr. Rajendra Prasad as the President of India, which came into effect on January 26, 1950, known and celebrated as the Republic Day of India. So, when we talk about the Constitution of India, it was enacted by the Constituent Assembly on 26 November 1949, but it came into effect on 26 January 1950. So why was this date chosen? It was chosen to commemorate the Purna Swaraj Declaration of Independence of 1930. With its adoption, the Union of India officially became the modern and contemporary Republic of India, and it replaced the Government of India Act 1935 as the country's fundamental governing document. Several conscious efforts were made to have consensus on different issues and principles and thereby avoid any kind of disagreement or mistrust. The consensus came in the form of the Objectives Resolution that was moved by Jawaharlal Nehru in the Constituent Assembly on December 17, 1946, which was almost unanimously adopted on January 22, 1947. Now, in the light of these objectives, the Assembly completed its task by November 26, 1949. So, from 26 January 1950, India became Republic of India. As you can see, this very important visual of Dr. Rajendra Prasad signing the new Constitution. The Constituent Assembly of India was elected to write the Constitution of India. Following India's independence from Great Britain, its members served as the nation's first parliament. This body was formed in 1946 for the purpose of making independent India's constitution. It passed a resolution in 1947 defining the objectives of the constitution. An important objective was to set up a Union of India comprising British India and the princely states. And secondly, to set up a federal form of government with separate state and central governments. To set up a democracy in which all power is derived from the people, where everyone is guaranteed justice, equality and freedom, where minorities, depressed classes and the tribals' rights are protected. And some other important aims and objectives were to protect the integrity of India and her sovereign rights over land, sea and air, to help India attain its rightful place in the world and work for peace and welfare of everyone. Dr. Sachidanand Sinha was the first president of the Constituent Assembly when it met on December 9, 1946. Later, Dr. Rajendra Prasad became the president and Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar became the chairman of its drafting committee on December 11, 1946, as you can see in this visual that is being shared on the screen. The Constituent Assembly consisted of 389 members, of which 292 were elected by the elected members of the provincial legislative assemblies, while 93 members were nominated by the princely states. To these were to be added a representative each from the 4 chief commissioners, provinces of Delhi, Ajmer, Marwar, Coorg and British Baluchistan. Now, this is a visual of the first day of the Constituent Assembly. A very important feature of Indian Constitution is that it has many borrowed features of several constitutions. So, let us see as to from which country India borrowed which particular aspect. So, if we talk about UK, from here the principle of nominal head, that is president, and the cabinet system of ministers, post of prime minister, parliamentary type of government, bicameral parliament, lower house being more powerful, and council of ministers being responsible to lower house, as well as the provision of a speaker in Lok Sabha were borrowed. From USA, the principle of a written constitution, then the appointment of vice president, fundamental rights, Supreme Court, head of the state known as president, then the provision of states, and also the principle of judicial review. From Australia, the idea of concurrent list, center-state relationship, and also the language of preamble. Then from USSR, the idea of fundamental duties and the 5-yearly plans. From Germany, it was emergency provisions, and from Japan, law on which the Supreme Court functions. From Canada, the principle of federal system as well as residual powers. And from South Africa, it was the procedure of constitutional amendment. From Ireland, the concept of directive principles of state policy. A very important part of Indian Constitution, in fact, soul of Indian Constitution, is the preamble. The preamble to the Constitution is a brief introductory statement which sets out the guiding purpose as well as the principle of the document. The preamble page, along with the other pages of the first and the original book of Constitution of India, was designed and decorated solely by renowned painter Biohar Shakha. The first words of the preamble were, "We the people." So what does this signify? It signifies that power ultimately emerges from people of India, and it is not a power which is exercised from above by any ruler or by any leader. So for the preamble has been amended only once in 1976 by 42nd Amendment, which inserted the words socialism, secularism and integrity. A brief description of these concepts are as follows. So if we talk about the statement, "We the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, and to secure to all its citizens justice, social, economic and political, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith and worship, and equality of status and of opportunity, and to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual and the unity and integrity of the nation." In our Constituent Assembly, this 26th day of November 1949, do hereby adopt, enact and give to ourselves this Constitution. Thank you.